Really and truly, in the final stretch, we just now need to attach our buttons for our buttons and buttonholes of sample book assignment 7, and we are done with our sample book. So let me first talk through the supplies that we need. So we have our buttonholes sewn to our shirt front. We have our other shirt front that has already been edge stitched, it's pressed, ready to go. We have a seam ripper, a marking implement like some tailor's chalk, ruler if we need it, some thread, hand sewing needles, some pins, and then our 3 buttons that we're going to be sewing on. So we are going to be sewing on flat buttons and shank buttons. So the difference between flat buttons and shank buttons is shank buttons have what we refer to as the shank. It is already physically attached. It's this plastic part to the button. And then flat buttons do not have that, so we have to build that in with the thread. So in order to know where we're going to put our buttons, we are first need to decide which, because remember we sewed 5 buttonholes, but you're only going to be graded on 3, so you're going to pick your 3 favorites, the 3 you think you did best on, and those are going to be the ones that you rip open, and you are then going to sew a corresponding button into those 3, and that's how I know which ones you're going to be graded on. So in order to rip them open, there are official buttonhole cutters. They can be hard to find and a little pricey. So like I know, so you can use a seam ripper. That's why we have it. So I know for my 3, I want this one, and this one. So these 2 are the ones I showed you what happens when you build a huge knot. So I know I don't want, those are the 2 of my least favorite. So when you use a seam ripper, you need to make sure that you're not going to cut through the bar. And the best way to do that is to take a pin and put it right before the bar, which is the end of the buttonhole. Because what can happen, and this is sometimes where one of your least favorite buttonholes might become your new one that you're going to be graded on, is if you take it without that, it can go straight through and all that. So depending on the thickness of your fabric, this sometimes take a little bit of pressure, especially with the interfacing, it can be a little bit. So I like to start in the middle, and I just go ever so gently, and that's how come I make sure I put mine quite a bit, like more than just like a yarn or 2 above my back bar, and you want to keep this straight. You don't want to cut, like veer out and start cutting the threads or cutting out through it. And we now have an opened buttonhole. So now I'm just going to take these pins and I'm going to move them to the next buttonhole I want to open. So again, I'm going to start in the center. Just need to get that through. Get it into the little crescent moon of the seam ripper. We're going to go towards our pin and then go on the other side towards our pin. Make sure we have the pin in. Try and keep it straight so we don't cut through the threads and cut outside of the buttonhole. And then remember, I said I'm skipping this one, and then I also, this is my other favorite one. So I'm going to put my pin in so I don't cut past the bar. Start in that center, go all the way to the crescent moon, and then go to one side. Sometimes it just doesn't want to go. So we're going to try this other side and get it going. And usually after you get it kind of going on one side, And having to like fight through is where most people end up cutting through and veering off. So we now have our 3 opened buttonholes. So I can now take this out. I'm going to need that pin, so I'm just going to set it to the side and put this back over here. So now to know where I'm going to put these, I find that the easiest way is to take this, line it up with our one underneath, and then I'm going to kind of just take this, take my marking tool, and that way I know exactly where those are. And then I also know I'm going to mark my center like that. And then I'm going to take my straight edge and just go through the center like that. So now I know I'm going to put my buttons in each of these 3 places. So let's start with our shank button, and then we'll do our 2 flat buttons down here. So I'm going to load up my needle with a double thread that goes to the elbow. You can either do your securing stitch or a knot. So I'm just going to go. I'm going to bring this here. And since this is a small button, I don't want this to be a very big stitch. So I want the stitch to be completely covered by my button. And then I like to, for our shank buttons, I always like to go just a stitch or 2 before. It seems to help with like that tension and help to balance it. And then I'm just going to take my shank button, put it through my needle, and bring it down, and line it up in the direction which, so since my needle went this way, that's where it's going to go. So I want the thread that's attached to the needle to be at the bottom. And we're just going to go through the fabric. And make sure that button is facing the top. And now we're going to loop through the button at least 3 times. So some of your machines that you can get in industry that will do this, especially on the shank buttons, sometimes only do it like once or twice, and that's where you get those really flimsy buttons that just fall off very quickly. So I usually shoot for like 4 times. So here is number 3. And then number 4. So I'm going to take this through the fabric to complete that 4th. And now I am going to knot this off. So I can either do a securing stitch, I can knot it and push that knot all the way. Sometimes you can even go kind of like around. I want it to be extra secure. I'm just going to go right above and do a quick little securing stitch. In the same place 3 times. Now I can cut this, and there is my flat button, or my shank button. So now I need to do my flat buttons. So I will say I already know I'm going to need some more thread. So re-thread my needle. So remember, in flat buttons, we have to build the shank with our thread. And so, well, first let me get this thread. So I'm going to have my knot in my thread. So the first step I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my straight pen. I got this a little crooked, so I'm going to, that will go here. Here's our light go. So I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to be doing this because this helps to bunch up some fabric so that we can build our flat button. So I'm just going to go. And just like before, I like to give it just at least one more for kind of like some stability. So now I'm going to take one of my flat buttons and I'm going to pop it on. And so now I'm going to line this up. So since this one is kind of like in this upper quadrant, I'm going to have that here. I'm going to line this up with this bar here for this one. And then I'm going to come down. I'm going to line that up. And then I like to do at least one more before I move to the other side and we really start securing it in. Notice I'm really trying to like tighten up that space in the back by making sure I'm kind of going in the same spots. So now I'm going to do my other side. Like so. So now that I've done each, if you want to make it extra secure, can go and you can start by making an X. So just go here. And then here. Make my little X. One more time. So you can feel that. It feels pretty strong. Then you're ready for the next one. So you can also, like I did 2 each time. So I did 2 here, and then 2 for each of my crosses. So I'm now ready. I can take my pen out because I'm now going to be building my shank. So also notice on the back, I've kept them pretty close, nice and tight, and they're not like all spread out, because that also helps with that tension by bringing that center of gravity in. So I'm now going to bring this, come up, but don't go through, then you want to come in between. The fabric and the button. And we're now going to build our shank. So since this is in place, I can now come in, cut these tails, and make sure not to cut the thread we are sewing with. So now I'm going to build the shank by going in a circular motion around the button. And I'm pulling tight, so it's nice and tight. And so this is further lifting the button from the fabric. This is why some of your commercial buttons fly off so easily, is the shank has not been built. So there's nothing building it in. So as the button is being lifted to have the fabric go in between, it's creating a lot of friction on the thread from that tension, from it being pried apart each time. And so then it just cuts through the threads that are holding the button onto the fabric. So we want to go. We're making sure to pull each time nice and tight between the layers. Then when we're ready, we go like we're starting, and then we're going to sew, put our needle through the shank. And this can be hard, so I'm going to use, but you don't want to go all the way through first because you want to cut the thread. So since we're sewing with dual thread or double thread, you want to take and have one go on top of the needle and one go below the needle. So it's through, and that's why we cut the thread, and we pull, and it acts kind of like a knot. And I'm going to do that twice. If it's really stiff, you might need to get something like pliers to help that needle through the thread. And that is what's really going to keep that nice and secure in there, so that your button does not go anywhere. Pull that nice and tight. And so then we're just going to go down through. So you can either do a securing stitch, if you want, you can tie a knot. And then we trim. we now have our flat button, nice and secure. So if we take our shirt front, and there we go. So we now have our button and buttonholes for sample book 7, and that completes our sample book. Congratulations, everyone. See you in our next project.